There'll be a recording. So we start with a bow. Put your hands together. This is called Anjali. And we just bow to each other. And here we are. So again, you're encouraged to come and practice for some part of that half hour or all of it before we start the class. But you can come in just for the class too. It's just that meditation is such an important part of this whole journey. In fact, in Buddhism, there are what are called the three wheels of learning. And they are meditation, study, which is what we're going to be doing, and contemplation, where you bring the two together and you contemplate your experience in the light of the ideas that you are learning. And this is the way that one progresses along the path. Also, from the study, things will be suggested to you that you may not have thought of, new ways of looking at the world and your life. And that's called the view. And when you meditate, the view becomes much clearer, the view forward, the view into a new way of understanding the world and one's place in it. Okay. So I'm going to start tonight, and tonight is going to be just a brief introduction to the Buddhist path as we practice it. And we're working our way through a book, a 3-volume set called The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa. Maybe Barry, could you put that in chat for everyone? Thank you. And this is a 3-volume set. This course will be based on the first volume. It's available in various places like Amazon, but we also have a discount. If you haven't received any emails from us, I recommend put your email into chat, and you will begin to get emails about this class, which will include things like the link to the video of the last class, which you can view if you missed it or just want to review it. It will include the reading assignment for the upcoming class, and it will include pieces of information like this one that the publisher of this book that we're working our way through, Shambhala Publications, is offering our class members a 40% discount. And there's a code, which is POA40, which you put in at checkout, POA40, and you get a pretty good discount on this volume. Now, The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And if you want to be on our mailing list, you can always opt out of it too, but put your email into chat and we will be included. Okay, tonight is going to be me. And on next week, I think you'll be hearing from Barry. We haven't worked it out yet, perhaps a little of me, but Barry's going to be taking over too. And we may have other people joining in, experienced practitioners, teachers. So the class tonight is based on the editor's introduction to Volume 1 of The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. It's a kind of summary of the whole path as it's presented in these 3 volumes. And what happened was that my teacher and the teacher of a few other people in this group, his name was Chogyam Trungpa. And you can, maybe Barry, why don't you put that into chat for people? It's spelled C-H-O with an umlaut over the O, that's 2 dots. C-H-O-G-Y-A-M, Chogyam, and Trungpa. And Chogyam is actually an abbreviation of his full name, his refuge name, which you're going to learn about refuge names, which was Chökyi Gyamtso, and it means Ocean of Dharma. So this book is called The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. It's kind of a joke, almost a pun on his name. Chogyam Trungpa is his what's called Tulku name in Tibetan, Tulku, What it means is that he was, and is still reborn many times. Um, Enlightened people, they say, when they pass, come back out of compassion for us unenlightened people to teach us. I once asked him, is it sort of like coming back to continue the conversation? And he agreed with that because he just loved being with people and teaching the Dharma and talking. So, for instance, the Dalai Lama is the 14th reincarnation of his line. Trungpa Rinpoche, who wrote this book, who gave these talks actually, was the 11th in his line. And there are many others. Almost any Tibetan teacher with the title Rinpoche, that means precious jewel, is a reincarnation of a previous teacher. And you may know of some other Rinpoches, and they are whatever reincarnation they are. The longest line of reincarnations recognized, you see, they have to be recognized. We're all reincarnations too. We just haven't been recognized as great teachers. But the oldest line is there are four main sects of Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama is a member of the Gelugpa sect. And the other three are the Sakya sect, the Nyingma sect, and the Kagyu sect. Trungpa Rinpoche was born Kagyu, but his most important teacher, it's called his root guru, was Nyingma. So he received the teachings and styles of both sects. And I forget why I'm telling you that, but so he was the 11th, and they come back and that the oldest line was the head of the Kagyu sect, Trungpa Rinpoche's sect. His title is always the Karmapa. And we're currently on the 17th Karmapa. I knew the 16th. He came to this country. He was very close with Trungpa Rinpoche. And he passed, and his reincarnation was identified. And the 17th Karmapa is now out and about teaching. He comes to the United States sometimes, and sometimes he's in India. And that's the longest line of recognized teachers, although there could be many others. They're just not identified and named and numbered. So we're going to be going through the first of these volumes, these 3 volumes, The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And what these are, when Trungpa Rinpoche arrived here in 1970, students began to come. And eventually, and starting in 1973, he began taking groups of them each year, a group of around anywhere from 150 to 250 plus students away for 3 months for a group retreat. And this retreat would be a combination of meditation practice, about half and half, and study. And the study was always divided in these 3 months into 3 sections, the so-called Hinayana section, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Now what this refers to is that the teachings in Tibet were organized into these 3 levels. The Hinayana literally means lesser vehicle, but Trungpa Rinpoche emphasized over and over that that was an inappropriate critique or slam, and that really what it should be translated as is foundational vehicle. The first vehicle, it's the first stage of the path, the Hinayana. Yana means vehicle, and Hin means lesser or former, but really we understand it as foundational. It's very, very important. It's the foundation upon which the rest of this path is built. The second yana, vehicle, is called the Mahayana. Maha means great yana. And that's the middle stage of the path. And the third vehicle in the third volume is called the Vajrayana. Vajra is a Sanskrit word. All of these are Sanskrit words, by the way. which means, Vajra means indestructible, diamond. So it's the diamond vehicle, the indestructible vehicle, Vajra. Actually, Vajra, there's a symbol. I'll show you a Vajra. Just for your enjoyment, this is a Vajra. The Vajra was, this is a small one, was Indra's weapon. Indra was the god of war, the Hindu god of war. And he held this in his hand. It's kind of like Thor's hammer, because when he wanted to destroy an enemy, he would throw it, and these prongs would open like this and strike the enemy, and then it would return into Indra's hand. And it's indestructible, this Vajra. So the Tibetans, for the highest level of the teachings, took it as a symbol, not for its aggressive aspect, but for its indestructibility, its diamond-like quality. So the path is organized in this way into these three yanas, three vehicles. And then there are sub-yanas within each one of these major yanas. And we, as practitioners, will proceed through the yanas, never letting go of what went before, but building on it, incorporating it into a more advanced or thorough understanding that is presented in the later yanas. So Trungpa Rinpoche gave this seminary every year for about 13 years. And he would give talks at night, and students would give talks during the day. And students would present topics that he wanted covered, but during the night he presented the heart of the path. And his talks were recorded, transcribed. I've got a complete set of them up there on that shelf. And then a few years ago, one of his students was asked by Shambhala Publications. Shambhala Publications publishes all of Trungpa Rinpoche's books. In fact, the head of Shambhala, the owner of Shambhala, Sam Berkholz, was a student of Trungpa Rinpoche and appeared early, and Trungpa Rinpoche basically made him the holder of the publication rights for all of his works. And what happened was that Judith Leaf was asked by Shambhala to digest all of those talks for 13 years into these 3 volumes so that people could read them. Initially, when Rinpoche was giving these talks and was alive, he died in 1987, you couldn't have access to the Vajrayana teachings as they were printed unless you had been to seminary. So today, if that rule were still in effect, we couldn't access these teachings, the Vajrayana, the 3rd volume, only the first 2. But he also specified that at some point after his death, he wanted to make these available. And so now today they are, and you can have them. They were only available as of maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Okay. Trungpa Rinpoche, just a little background. I've got my notes here. He was born, nobody knows really when he was born. You know, they didn't keep birth certificates in Tibet. And so he, sometimes he said he was born in 1939. He liked that year. I forget why. It was some kind of significance. Nobody really knew how old he was or when he was actually born, but we use 39. And I think in the Profound Treasury, they say 1940. In the eastern part of Tibet, Sarmang it was called, and he left in 1959 as a result of the Chinese communist invasion. In India, he came under the patronage of an Englishwoman named Frida Bedi, who had made him a teacher of the lamas that had come out of Tibet and were living in India, some of them, and he taught him what was called the Young Lama School. And eventually she secured for him a fellowship at Oxford University in England. And he went to England, studied at Oxford, and he and another friend of his, a fellow teacher, started a monastery, you might call it, in Scotland called Samye Ling. It was named after the first monastery in Tibet that was built in the 8th century. And Trungpa Rinpoche taught there, and after a number of years, he decided to disrobe. He felt that his robes were unnecessary protection and were hampering his teaching. He wanted to become more Western. He married an English woman named Diana Pybus, and the two of them emigrated to America in 1970, which is when I met him at what is now called Karme Churling, a meditation center in northern Vermont. And he began to teach here in America, which he loved. He felt that the Americans were very open to the teachings, although there was a lot of what he called spiritual materialism abroad. That is, corrupting true spirituality for the purposes of ego, to build up your sense of self and importance. And so this idea of spiritual materialism, he was very on the attack about that. Now, just to give you an idea, Buddhism developed over centuries, of course. The Buddha lived, the two traditional dates for him are around 560 to 480 BC in India. And when he died, his Sangha fractured. And there was a period for about 250 years, which is now called the period of the 18 schools. And these were, people disagreed about what the Buddha's teaching truly was. This happens all the time. In fact, after Trungpa Rinpoche died, our Sangha fractured. It is still fractured, based on disagreements about what was important in his teachings. And there was a movement of Buddhism out of India. Starting around 250 BC, Buddhism went to Ceylon. And the form of Buddhism that went to Ceylon was a particular school, one of the 18 schools of Buddhism. And from Ceylon, it spread into Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, Burma, Thailand, and Vietnam. Around the time of Christ, Buddhism left India and went east into China. There it had a very difficult transition, mainly because of the linguistic differences between Sanskrit, or Hindi, the languages that Buddhism was written in India, and Chinese. They were at opposite ends of the linguistic spectrum. And for the Chinese, it took a while for the Chinese to both A, understand what Buddhism truly was, and B, bring it into their culture. Wherever Buddhism has gone, it has found a congenial cultural aspect to identify with. In China, it was Taoism. And Buddhism assumed many of the qualities and concepts of Taoism, but transformed them into Buddhism. That was about the time of Christ, around 400. There was a great translator who appeared in China who really understood what he was translating, and Buddhism began to take off in China. In the 7th century, it went from China to Japan. It also went to Korea. And in the 7th century, Buddhism went from India to Tibet. So the 7th century was an important time. Buddhism was appearing in Japan, Korea, Tibet, and then later in Mongolia. And now Buddhism is throughout Southeast Asia. The Buddhism of China went south as well into Vietnam. So Vietnam has both the Buddhism of Ceylon and the Buddhism of China, which came down into the south. And then Buddhism just continued to spread. Now, it really didn't leave the East until modern times. But by modern times, when the Chinese communists took over China in 1949, at that time, Buddhism was the most populous religion in the world. There were more Buddhists than there were adherents of any other religion. And then the Chinese, of course, outlawed all religion in China, and Buddhism went underground. and it's been coming back in modern times now. This is I'm giving you this brief overview. In Tibet, meanwhile, let's go back a bit. In India, Buddhism developed over the centuries from the time of the Buddha, remember he died at 480, up until and through after the time of Christ. Buddhism kept developing. You see, one thing about Buddhism, it's a very, very, very different form of religion. Religion almost doesn't apply because there are no beliefs in Buddhism. There is no credo. There is no equivalent of the Quran or the Bible, the Holy Writ, the word engraved in stone. The teachings, the words, are constantly changing, meeting the needs of new people, new times, new cultures. And so Buddhism is a continually evolving set of ideas. The experience to which it points is not. There is this distinction between what in Buddhism is called relative truth, which is the truth of words, which is always changing to meet the needs of the times and people, and absolute truth, which is pure experience beyond words. Words are only pointers to the absolute truth. And those pointers are useful at particular times and places and for particular people. So the teachings continuously evolved over the centuries. What happened in India was that there was this proliferation of the so-called the teachings into these three major divisions of what are called now the lesser vehicle, which Trungpa Rinpoche feels that's an inappropriate criticism, and it's better translated as foundational vehicle. The greater vehicle, the Mahayana, and that developed in India, and then it exported, and the Vajrayana, which also developed in India, and really developed out of Hindu tantric roots. The Buddhists co-opted a lot of tantric symbols and ideas and brought them into Buddhist practice, and out of that, and with other things too, made the Vajrayana. So the Vajrayana had its roots with tantric yogis practicing in the forests, but at the same time, Buddhism in India was developing in great universities. There were these universities, the most famous of which was called Nalanda, and there were several others, a number of other big ones, Vikramashila, Udantapuri, but Nalanda was the biggest one. You can go to Nalanda right now. It's in the province of Bihar, north of Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha achieved enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, and it's north of that, an easy drive, a few hours, and the Indians have rebuilt. They've excavated and found the buildings of Nalanda, and they rebuilt them up to a height of about 4 feet, so you can see the outlines of the buildings. and it's enormous. Reputedly, there were as many as 10,000 people there, and the Buddhists welcomed other religions and other sects. The idea was to have a great dialogue, conversation, and so there were many religions represented. And Buddhism developed in these universities. And that's where the proliferation of the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana took place, because the Vajrayana came out of the forests with these wild, ash-smeared Hindu yogis and was brought into the great monasteries and turned into what's now called Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism. So this is a very fast overview of how Buddhism developed and what we're going to be studying. We're starting with the first volume, the Hinayana volume, obviously, because this is the beginning teachings. So Trungpa Rinpoche arrived here in 1970 at the age of about 31 and taught here till 1987 within these seminaries. I and others have been to a number of them. He considered them critically important. In Tibet, he would often go and visit his teacher, his main teacher, for months at a time, traveling on horseback and living in tents. He and his fellow students, while these teaching, while his teacher, his root teacher, Jamgon Kongtrul of Shechen, his name was, delivered teachings for months and months. So when he created Vajradhatu Seminary, it was a recreation of those teaching situations in Tibet. And he felt it was terribly important. He loved it. And it was where he really began to give the heart of the teachings to his students. Most of these students who attended seminaries, these Vajradhatu seminaries they were called, had a personal connection with Trungpa Rinpoche. He had to approve every one of them. Occasionally, he let in somebody with whom he didn't have a connection, often to bad results. There's stories about that. So, and he often felt that, you see, Buddhism was dying in Tibet, that when the communists came in, as unfortunate as that was, the takeover of Tibet, it had saved Buddhism from a slow death that was already occurring. It was losing its heart, its meaning, and that it was going to be reborn in the West, and that he hoped that his students would be among those who took the true Buddhism back to the East and replanted it. So the structure of the seminary experience typically began with a period of maybe 10 days to 2 weeks of meditation practice. And that means that we would meditate all day, every day in periods ranging. He followed the Zen tradition of sesshin. For those of you who know what a sesshin is, group meditation practice. This didn't exist in Tibet, but he saw Suzuki Roshi at Zen Center and also down in Tassajara. He visited there and loved it. So we did this together. We're still doing it together, having group meditation practices. This group met last year for a week at Karme Churling, the meditation center in Vermont, and we all practiced together all day, every day, alternate periods of sitting and walking meditation. And that's what seminary happened. We started with about 2 weeks of that, and then we'd go into 2 weeks of the Hinayana teachings, and then we do 2 weeks more of sitting. Then we do 2 weeks of the Mahayana teachings. And during the teachings, there was also sitting, but there was just much less, just a few hours a day. But during the sitting periods, we were meditating 10, 12 hours a day easy. Then we come back in one more sitting period, and then the Vajrayana teachings and close. And he also introduced, he saw at Tassajara, we saw the practice of oryoki, for those of you who are familiar with that, which is a ritualized form of eating, very ritualized form of eating. And he loved it, so we incorporated that into these group sittings. All meals would be served oryoki style, and you had your own little kit of bowls and eating utensils, and there was a particular way movements that you went and you undid them, and then the person came in with the food and bowed and knelt in front of you, and you took the food in a very particular way. Anyhow, we did oryoki, and there were some real oryoki mavens developed. Let's see. Trungpa Rinpoche always taught at night, sometimes into the late night, sometimes into the early morning hours. And there was one year when actually he reversed the schedule, and we were wound up sleeping in the mornings, and then staying up and studying with him all night. So we're going to talk a little bit about these 3 yanas in a bit more time here. The first yana, the Hinayana, this is the introduction to the basic teachings. We're going to be going through this. The main motivation of a person when they come to the path, and so this is really what the Hinayana is dealing with, is suffering and confusion. One wants to escape them. One wants to escape the suffering, the unhappiness of one's life, and understand it better. this is accomplished through meditation. And the meditation of the Hinayana stage of the path has really to do with beginning to understand your mind and calm it, as well as beginning to develop greater awareness of one's life. There are two main styles of meditation. The first that we learn is called shamatha. It means, in the Tibetan, the word is shine, and it literally means abiding in peace. And what one does with shamatha, this is also called by Hindus the common practice, and Buddhists call it the common practice because it's held in common with the Hindu tradition. If you go into a yoga studio, you will be taught shamatha. Shamatha is one-pointed focus on an object. It could be any object. It could be a mantra. So TM, Transcendental Meditation, is a form of shamatha because you're focusing one pointedly on a sound. In a yoga studio, you might work with the breath, and you're focusing one pointedly on your breath as it goes in, as it comes out, in, out. You might even be counting your breaths. But it can be anything. It could be on a statue that you put in front of you and focus on that. It could be on your, it could be on a pencil that you've got in front of you. It can be anything. You focus your mind one pointedly on an object. And it has three virtues. One is that you begin to realize how much you're thinking. Most people don't even know. They're so lost in thought. But when you try to come back and focus your mind on an object, you begin to see how much we're lost in what Buddhists call monkey mind. The mind is just constantly thinking of different things and jumping from one place to another, sort of randomly. The second virtue is that you begin to develop a muscle of being able to recognize that you're lost in a dream and come back into the present by coming back to awareness of something that only happens in the present, your breath, or something else. What's the third virtue? Barry, remember? The third virtue is you get a rest because thought is so anxious. All thought, to a small degree or a large degree, is about some form of anxiety, wanting things to be different. What am I going to have for dinner? Oh, should I have this or should I have that? And there's this feeling of anxiety in it, much less other more anxious thoughts. So when you come back into clear awareness of a present object, you get a rest from that anxiety. And that's the third virtue of shamatha. Vipassana proceeds on from there. Now you're resting in the present moment, but instead of being aware of just one thing, your breath or a mantra, you come back and you're aware of all of this space, the space that you inhabit, your whole life. That's Vipassana. And these two practices are taught to you at the Hinayana stage of the path. They go all the way through the path. Vipassana incorporates shamatha, mindfulness practice, because you can't come back and be aware of this present moment if you're dreaming about the past or the future. So it has that mindfulness quality to it. But now it's got awareness as well. You wouldn't practice shamatha driving your car, focusing on your breath. You're going to have a serious accident. But you do, if you practice Vipassana, awareness here in the present moment, you'll drive better. You'll come back from those thoughts, oh, that guy just cut me off. What am I going to do? I'm going to honk my horn, and you come back from that into awareness. So this is the core of the meditation practice of the Hinayana stage, and the Mahayana. It just develops further and further and goes deeper and deeper. And you study some key doctrines, one of which is what are called the 3 marks of existence. These 3 marks are suffering, that we suffer all the time. We wish things were different. That is the very essence of suffering. Wishing things were different. Wishing things were otherwise. Not being happy. There are 3 different styles of this. One is that you are unhappy with the way things are, as they are now. A second style is that you wish things would do, and you have a vision of how they could be in the future. And I forget what the third one is. We'll come to it in the teachings. So that's the first of the three marks, suffering. The second of the three marks is impermanence, that all things are impermanent. Suzuki Roshi, the master of Zen Center, the author of his so-called, he didn't write it, but there was his talks, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, a great book if you've never read it, sensational book, but it might confuse you a little bit when you are also studying the Tibetan teachings because there's different terminology. And he was once asked, Suzuki Roshi, by one of his students, a fellow named David Chadwick, if he could sum up the essence of Buddhism in just a couple of words. And David didn't really think that Roshi would be able to do that or want to do that. And Roshi, without even pausing, said, everything changes. Everything changes. Nothing endures, even for an instant. Everything is a constant flux. That's the second mark of existence. And the third mark of existence is the one that is the most profound and with which we will be involved throughout the path. And that is the mark of what's called, translated actually by Trungpa Rinpoche, the Sanskrit for it is anatma. Could be translated as no soul, there is no soul. He translated it as egolessness. And if you read the Oxford English Dictionary, which is an etymological dictionary, it shows you the origins of words. If you look up egolessness, it attributes it to Trungpa Rinpoche. He invented that word. And what it means, you see, is that part of the confusion and suffering is that we believe firmly in I, that I exist. And if I exist, then you exist too, I and other. And so we move through our lives in this dualistic, polar relationship with everything in the world. I and my friend, I and my enemy, I and my dinner, I and my future, I and my past. And that relationship is fraught with unhappiness. There are three relations I and other can have. This is also part of the Hinayana teachings. And these relations are called the three poisons. What it means is that if you see, if you're constantly engaged in this I-other prospect, the other can either be for you, like, oh, a hamburger, yum, I want to take it and consume it. Oh, somebody who's attractive, I want him to get closer to me. Or it can be aggressive and unhappy. Oh, that tastes terrible. Take it away. Oh, that person irritates me. I don't want anything to do with them. That person insulted me. I don't want anything to do with them. That's an aggressive relationship between I and other. And the third possibility is neutral. The other has no implication for you, and then you don't care about it. You just stay the same distance. These are called the three poisons. And really, the Hinayana path is about discovering that one of those poles is a myth. And that pole is I. That I is just a word. And that what we think of as I is constantly changing. So much so that you can't even find it, any essence to it. It's a continual flux of experience. Now I'm looking at this bowl on my desk. Now I'm looking at the image of myself on the screen. Now I'm looking at the image of Emily on the screen. Now I'm hearing these words. It's a constant changing presentation. And so working with the idea of egolessness, we begin to dissolve this myth of an existence of me with all my self-importance, me with all of my happiness and suffering, me with all my hopes and fears. All of that begins to dissolve. And that happens at the Hinayana stage of the path. Ultimately, we begin to deal with the issue of other as well, out there. This cup, this coffee cup, the words, this gong striker, these people that I'm looking at, do they actually exist? And as we begin to discover that they too are just names for passing sensual phenomena, we begin to move into the second stage of the path, which is the Mahayana, the greater vehicle, and the doctrine of what's called emptiness, shunyata in Sanskrit, which is a new description, you might say, of reality. And in what the doctrine of emptiness is pointing to is our life, the world, the universe, the cosmos is empty of anything having any true existence. Nothing exists. Everything is a constant passing phenomena, just like the images on your computer screen. They're here for us. You can't even measure the amount of time that they endure, and then they're gone. They change, they morph. Nothing stays the same for even a second. Everything is constantly coming into being, which not even really coming into being, and then disappearing. And that is the doctrine of emptiness, shunyata, which characterizes, is the main doctrine of the Mahayana. There's so much more to this that we're going to be going through. 3 marks, we're going to be talking about I've mentioned the 3 wheels of learning. They're the basic core Hinayana teachings about the nature of mind, confused mind, and how it works. It has 8 different divisions that we're going to learn about, the 8 aspects of mind. And then there are the practices of cultivating virtue and getting rid of non-virtue and becoming, there are different stages of the path. There are 2 main stages at the Hinayana level. What's called the Pratyeka Buddha stage, and before that, the Arhat stage. And we're going to be, the Shravaka stage. The first stage is the stage of learning to be a listener, learning to listen properly. And the second stage is beginning to realize the teachings, especially the teaching of egolessness, that I doesn't exist, and what that means for how we live our lives. So we begin to move then through the Hinayana stage of the path into the Mahayana, and the emphasis changes. Whereas in the Hinayana, the emphasis was on escape from suffering, in the Mahayana stage of the path is that having escaped from suffering a bit, we begin to fall in love with the world. And we begin to develop true clarity of vision and true compassion for the world, a feeling of love and of genuine desire to be of service. Why? Because we're so moved by the beauty and our affection for what we're seeing. Having given up this focus on suffering, we can begin to turn our attention to true appreciation of what's out there. And the Mahayana path, the middle stage of the path, is characterized by this desire to be of benefit to other beings. The practitioner on this stage of the path is called a bodhisattva. That means an awakened person. Bodhi is awake, sattva is being. And what it means is that they've begun to wake up to the emptiness of I and other. And in that emptiness, things emerge so much more vividly and beautifully. It's like, if you wake up in the morning and you're thinking about, my day is going to be terrible, and I got to do this and I got to do that, and you don't even notice the sun coming up because you're so lost in thought. That anxious thought grays out our perception of the world. But when we begin to come present, we begin to wake up from those dreams. Suddenly, we notice, the sun's rising. Look at those green trees. Look at my friend with the smile on his face. and we begin to wake up to the beauty and vividness of the world. That is the Mahayana stage of the path, increasingly. So there's tremendous appreciation, and it opens our hearts. And the Bodhisattva, this awakened being, the person who's waking up out of this fog of anxiety and unhappiness, begins to fall in love with this beauty. You've done it many times. You've walked out of your house and you've seen how gorgeous the day is, and you can feel your heart open. Or somebody says something to you that's so opening, so communicative, so moving, and it opens your heart, and suddenly you see them in a new light. This is the Mahayana stage of the path, the opening of the heart. Now, the Hinayana stage was really about beginning to get free from egregious suffering. And the Mahayana stage is about beginning to open one's heart to the world and fall in love with it and want to be of service. Genuinely want to be of service, not out of some sense of goody two-shoes, like I'm going to be a virtuous person, but because you're moved and you want to. We all feel this at every stage. It just becomes more intense. So there are qualities that develop at the Mahayana stage of the path. This quality of compassion, and there's a quality of skillful means that one begins to see how one can genuinely and effectively be of service. This is called skillful means, upaya in Sanskrit, and we begin to develop both of them. And there are particular practices that we'll practice. We do now the practice of Tonglen, which is the development of compassion. We'll practice Lojong, which is training the mind. There's some wonderful exercises. You're going to love this when we get to Lojong. Everybody's favorite, I think, or at least mine is certainly, is the practice. It's called, there are 57 slogans, and they all advise you to do different things. You can buy a deck of cards, which each card is 57 slogans. Here's my card for the day. It says, you can read it. Don't bring things to a painful point. And you study these things, and let's see, what are my notes on the back from the teachings? It says, don't humiliate or discourage people so that you can stay ahead of them. Rather, encourage them on their path. Come along behind them. Don't blame your own dissatisfaction, pain, and misery on anybody else. Don't try to impose your power on others. That's my explanation from the notes and teachings. And we'll study Lojong, everybody's favorite one, which is also a very challenging one. These change your mind. The favorite one is drive all blames into one. And the one is me. This is a practice that in any situation where there's blame being attributed, you take it. It doesn't matter if it's completely obvious that it's the other person's fault, you take the blame. This is a great crusher of ego. And it's amazing what can happen. It really is. When you try it, and so many people in our Sangha have tried this at different times. I always tell the story of the first time I tried it. I was in New York, and I was getting on a bus, and I just had my hip replaced, and I was on a crutch, and I got on this bus, and there was hardly any room, And then I saw this seat, but there was a woman sitting. There was two seats together, and she was obese, and she was completely out of one seat and into the other. She was taking up a seat and a half. And there I was on my crutches, and so I sat down and I bumped her, to get over her. I was angry, and she said, "You bumped me," and I said, "You're taking up two seats," and we sat there fuming, the two of us. And then I remembered the slogan. I went like that, and mentally, and I turned to her and I said, "I'm sorry, I was rude." She looked at me and she said, I'm sorry. I was taking up 2 seats and I was rude too. By the time we got off the bus, I got off the bus, we were waving goodbye to each other. This is such a common happening, and it's so difficult to drive the blame into yourself to take it when you know the other person was in the wrong. So anyhow, we'll go through Lojong's at some point on this path. That's on the next book, not this book. Finally, we get to the Vajrayana. Now, there are 2 ways to understand the Vajrayana, and I'm going to go fast here because it's so profound and difficult. One is that as you're practicing and moving towards greater and greater sanity, this is really the path of sanity and compassion, you might say, which is called, that great sanity is called enlightenment, but that's a very woo-woo kind of word. Waking up, though, waking up from the delusions of I and other delusions too. And as we move along this path, our practices become more and more sophisticated. And there are 2 ways of understanding the Vajrayana. One is that you begin to practice Vajrayana practices with the aim of becoming more sane and ultimately enlightened. Another version of the Vajrayana path is that you move up through the Mahayana, and the Mahayana has 10 stages. We'll get to them. You can hear there's a lot of doctrine here. And we move up through the Mahayana, and when you get to the last stage, you actually achieve enlightenment. And you move into the Vajrayana in a very real way. It's not just a practice. It becomes a description of the world as you are experiencing it. So there's 2 ways to understand the Vajrayana. Most of us understand it the first way. We do the practices because they are helping us become saner, moving towards enlightenment, if you wish. I'm a little uncomfortable using that phrase because it's so goal-oriented. And really goal orientation, personal goal orientation, is a huge obstacle on the path. Really what we're doing is we're becoming human beings, saner, more available, more compassionate, more intelligent, more open. So when you get to the Vajrayana, there are some really unusual teachings, very unusual practices. This is called, also has other names, Vajrayana. It's called the Tantrayana. Tantra, you've perhaps heard of Tantra. It's called the Mantrayana. Mantra literally means, you assume mantra, if you've done any TM, it means chanting Hari Om or whatever it may be. But actually the word mantra means mind protection. Because when you focus your mind one-pointedly on an object, in this case a sound, it protects you from neuroticism, from craziness in your own mind, because you're focusing one-pointedly on an object. And it's called Tantrayana. Tantra, and the word Tantra literally means continuity. Continuity of what? Continuity of mind, consciousness, awareness. It goes on continuously. And one begins to tune into that. Because normally we don't. Normally we're just lost in thoughts. What am I going to have for dinner? Oh, I want to watch this TV program. Oh, that person, made me angry. And we're lost in these conceptualized thoughts that just jump around. When you come back to this clear awareness, here we are. You're looking at your computer screen. You're hearing these words. It's effortless. That awareness is always there. It's like the sky. And thoughts are like clouds or birds that come across the sky and then they're gone. But the sky is always there. Just so, your fundamental consciousness, your fundamental awareness, the awareness that encompasses everything that changes in it, is always there. And that's what Tantra refers to, the continuity of awareness. And we begin to live in that more and more. Tantra is also very focused on a relationship with a teacher. And that's a real issue. because the teachings are becoming more and more personal, and they are communicated by one living human being to another with heart. The relationship with a teacher in the Vajrayana has to be very open, deep friendship, beyond any kind of qualifiers. It's a matter of opening. You know how it is when you open your mind to somebody else and they relax and open their mind to you, and then you can go back and forth like that and achieve a kind of real openness. That's what happens with the teacher, and it's terribly important in the Vajrayana. There are all kinds of forms. Some of them get pretty bizarre. They're in for some fun. There are practices and texts. These texts are often called sadhanas, which means a practice text, and you'll chant the text. You'll do visualizations of very unusual images, to say the least. These images are sometimes peaceful, sometimes like Buddhas, sometimes wrathful. And by wrathful, I mean really wrathful. And those wrathful images are, you see, wisdom is embodied in these images that you're visualizing. And wisdom can be peaceful or it can be wrathful. I had a friend once who I was listening to him talk about this, and he was giving a very trivial example of wrathful wisdom. He said it's like a mother is standing on a curb with her toddler, and traffic is going by, and the toddler steps off the curb into the street, and she screams, "Get back!" That's wrathful wisdom. See? Wrathful wisdom wakes you up. Sometimes we need wrath to awaken us. And the Vajrayana, basically, the imagery in the Vajrayana basically divides between the peaceful images. They're often called deities, but that's a Western word. And really doesn't apply, because in Buddhism, the gods are confused beings just like you and me. The only difference is that we're in a much better place to get enlightened. Gods are too consumed with pleasure. They say of gods that everything they see is beautiful, everything they smell is perfume, everything they consume is ambrosia. They make love with a glance instead of the messy way that human beings have to do it. And they're stuck in pleasure. And they're dumb, gods. But it's one of the modalities of how to be a sentient being, which we are. The human realm, which we're in, is the best realm. It has the best optimal combination, you might say, of pleasure and pain, enough pain to motivate us to tread the path, and enough pleasure so that we're not completely depressed and wrecked by the pain, and we have some intelligence. All the other realms, and there are 5 other realms, you can't achieve enlightenment in them because they're psychologically and physically inappropriate. So in the Vajrayana, we'll take vows. These are vows of obedience to the teacher. They're called samaya vows. They're very important. We'll receive initiations, sometimes called empowerments. The Sanskrit word for that is abhisheka, which literally means sprinkle and pour, because you're blessed by having some liquid poured over your head during the course of these ceremonies. And you are, by taking an abhisheka, you are empowered, given permission and the instructions to do a particular kind of practice. And there are many. What else? There's so much. I mean, the canon, if you could see all the texts, would fill the wall behind me and more. It's just endless because it's proliferated over the centuries. There are 2 kinds of teaching, what is called kama and terma. Kama are words. That's literally what kama means. And the Buddha, his teachings, he told his teachings, and people memorized them because there was very little writing in 5th century India. And so people memorized them, which is why there's so many mnemonic devices in Buddhism. You know, the 5 of these, 4 of those, the 3 of the other. They're all mnemonic devices to help us memorize them. But later they began to write them down. And the teachings proliferated enormously. As one teacher came up with a new way of putting it. And I asked Trungpa Rinpoche once, I said, I get the impression that over the centuries, people would sit around, great teachers perhaps, and one of them might say to the others, I've come up with a new way of putting it. What do you think of this? And then he would tell them, and the other would say, yeah, that's pretty good. So this is the way the words are passed down orally. And you know what happens when you tell a story to one person and they tell it to another and they tell it to another, it changes over time. So the spoken teachings, the Kama teachings, until they're written down, are very mutable. They change. So there's a second kind of teaching which is very peculiar to Tantrism, and especially to the Nyingma sect, although there's Kagyu as well, and all the sects have this kind of teaching. It's called Terma, which is revealed treasure teachings. And what this means is that a teacher long ago had a teaching which he or she knew was inappropriate for the people of their time. And so they hid it, knowing that it would be discovered perhaps hundreds of years in the future. And by whom and when? I'm getting a funny noise here from somebody.
I just muted him. That was
Okay.
okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So these terma, you see, they're called hidden teachings, hidden treasures. What it could be there, and there are 2 kinds of terma, what are called earth terma, which are physical objects, and mind terma, which are like radio transmissions. And an earth terma might be a text. It could be anything. It could be a little statue. It could be hidden anywhere in a stream, in the bed of a stream. It could be hidden in the rafters of a house. It could be hidden magically inside solid rock. And the finder of it, who is called a terton, might reach into solid rock and pull it out. And the instant they've got this in their hands, the story goes, they have to, the teachings start flooding into them, and they have to write it down very quickly. It comes in what's called Dakini script. You're going to love this one. Dakini is feminine energies. And there are 3 or 4 levels of Dakini. A human level, and a Dakini who's a woman, and there are also Dakas, which are male. Dakini energy is hot, colorful, intuitive, and dangerous. And if a human being is a Dakini, she's a woman who's very mercurial, unpredictable, powerful, perhaps beautiful in some way, and highly intelligent. But then there are levels up, all the way up to enlightened Dakinis. And these texts, when they're found, if there is a text, are written in what's called Dakini script. It's the language of the Dakinis. And when the person starts to read it, it evaporates. So they have to be writing it down very fast. But it could just be a statue, and when they touch it, the teachings flood into them. The other kind of teachings are called mind terma, gomter. And someone will realize that they're getting a radio transmission, as it were. Trungpa Rinpoche received both. He had physical objects that he found, and he received mind terma. Perhaps you've understood that he taught a lot about Shambhala. All those teachings, the Shambhala teachings, were mind terma. He just called for pen and paper, and then it looked like automatic writing. He wrote down these texts. So there are these 2 kinds of teachings, the Kama, which are the written word passed down and at some point put on paper, and Terma, which are hidden treasures discovered by people. And this is what constitutes the Vajrayana, these 2 kinds of teachings. I think I'm getting pretty close to the end of this. There's so much more. It just goes, and these teachings are huge. You could never plumb them in a lifetime, not even begin. It's just really what you do, you see, especially when you get to the Vajrayana, is you find that aspect working with a teacher that is congenial to you, and that's what you focus on, and you let the rest go. Might be several aspects, but you can't possibly encompass it all. There's no human being could, not even close. It's so various. So I'm going to stop there. It's now almost 7 here and 9 your time if you're on the East Coast. And we can have a brief discussion. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to try something. We have this other course which meets, and we meet on Tuesday. And oh, by the way, the reading assignment for next week, and Barry's going to be teaching, and we haven't worked this out, is in the Profound Treasury, Volume 1, pages 3 through 20. That's 3 chapters. And I hesitated to give you so much, but I think you can do it. And these 3 chapters are pretty good, really good. This stuff is so beautiful and profound. This is a personal testimony. I've been studying this since I met Rinpoche in 1970. What is that, 53 years? And I just picked up the volume 1 that you're going to be reading and read those 3 chapters and was knocked out. And I heard things, in my mind that I had never heard before. The teachings continue to reveal themselves over and over and over. It's like it's not like you read it once and you've got it. You'll be absorbing it over and over. Or maybe I'm just a slow learner. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to try this out and see how it goes. We have a discussion group that meets on Wednesday after meditation. We've always had this for the first class, which meets Tuesday. What we're going to do is invite all of you to come to that discussion group, and we'll see how it goes. We'll see if we can mix the discussion from these 2 courses in one discussion group. It's just because it's getting too awfully chock-a-block. And if it doesn't work, then we'll come up with something else, a different night for a discussion group. So you're all invited to the discussion group next Wednesday, right after the evening meditation. Okay. Questions, comments, complaints? That was a fast overview of a huge topic. And the funny thing is, one can get enlightened just like that.
Yeah, it's easy.
Right.
Sarah.
Sarah?
So I've been practicing for a couple of years now. And one thing I've noticed is that like everything is more beautiful. And I think it's maybe because I'm not suffering as much. I've been able to kind of change how my brain sees things. But when you were explaining the God realm, then it made me wonder if maybe I'm just sort of living in a form of God realm and that I got really confused somewhere along the way. So what's the difference? Like I do walk around and I see beauty everywhere and everyone I meet is really beautiful and um I'm surrounded by flowers that smell amazing every day. So how do I know if I'm stuck in some God realm or if it is just something that's happening because I'm on the path?
I mean, we all experience all of the realms. There's the hell realm, which is the realm of hatred and aggression. And each one of us knows what that's like. And there's the God realm of pleasure that you and I have been describing. But as a human being, if you are practicing you're giving up any kind of, you see, every time you sit down to practice, the very boringness of it, it's boring to sit there and watch your breath, right? That boringness is the fail-safe. It's absolutely essential. And that boredom, Trungpa Rinpoche said, in the beginning, when you start practicing, that boredom is hot. You don't like it. Eventually, it becomes cool boredom, cool like a mountain stream. And it's still boring, but now you're sitting with it and letting it just roll. And that boredom is the key, and that you're letting your ego, that desire for constant entertainment, sit there and be frustrated and perhaps even disappear. So if you're practicing and you're studying the Dharma, you don't worry about it. Gods can't do that. They're the stories about the gods watching the Buddha down on earth, and they were just like a bunch of dumb jocks, and they'd be up there in the heavens and they'd be seeing him down the earth, and they say to each other, gee, I don't understand what he's doing, but I think he's really great. So here I'm going to throw some flowers down on him. That kind of thing. That's what the gods would do. Hell beings on the other end of the spectrum, full of hatred and aggression, are so full of fear, they don't have time to practice the Dharma. They're just utterly consumed with fear and hatred. Human beings are right in the right place. And more than that, as you'll learn if we ever get to it in Tantra, there's a thing called that is translated into English as the subtle body. It's a different understanding of what the body is. And it's made up of channels and winds and energies and chakras, energy centers. Only human beings have the complete subtle body, and it's necessary to have it in order to tread the path to enlightenment. So, no worries.
Thank you.
Yeah, also, I just wanted to say that if you were trapped in the God realm, then you wouldn't be asking the question.
Right. Good point. Excellent point. Yeah, God realm is really dangerous, actually, because sooner or later, the God begins to age. They begin to lose their beauty. And they say that the other gods begin to smell them. And when the God realizes they're beginning to age out, they get furious that they have wasted so much time, and they're plunged all the way down into the hell realm with that fury. That's what can happen to a god. But there are lots of human gods around, the movie stars. Some of them kill themselves. Some of them are quite happy.
I'm wondering if anyone else has any, because we're getting close to the end here.
Yeah, sorry.
If there's any other questions or comments or.
I guess I had a couple of thoughts, but it is late, so maybe I'll save them for another time.
How about one?
No.
Okay.
It gets too complicated. I'm very glad we're doing this. Thank you.
Me too. I think that what you're about to read, you'll find really interesting. I certainly did.
This is a very auspicious occasion, actually, that we're, embarking on the entry to this wonderful path. And much of what we learn right at the beginning and the practices is stuff that stays with you and takes you all the way through to enlightenment.
So tonight we did a huge overview, and now we're going to be drilling down into particulars. It'll be much more manageable and workable and perhaps, I hope, meaningful. Okay. Well, We always close with the closing chants. What do we have here? Sarah.
I can bring him up in pretty quickly here.
Sarah, would you lead us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks.
Yeah, I can do this. Just a prayer for peace and dedication, right?
Right.
Okay, here they come.
And we
We
mute
should,
everybody. Everybody's muted because otherwise we get cacophony on Zoom. But you
Yeah.
can chant along or not as you wish.
Oops. Well, where did my?
Here, I'll do it, Barry.
I have. I can't find the.
I got it.
I had it. It went away. Okay. Mute everyone.
We will close with a prayer for peace, and then by dedicating the merit generated by our practice and study for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, John.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John and Barry and Sarah. Have a
Uh,
lovely evening.
See some of you on Wednesday and some of you, I hope, on Thursday.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you for doing this.
Good night.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Good to meet you, Dave.
You too.
And you, Bukita. What do we have about, oops. Alexa, turn on the bedroom lights.